Father Elias sat in his parked car, fingers moving methodically over the smooth beads of his rosary as he recited the familiar prayers. The ritual brought a measure of calm to his troubled mind, though questions continued to swirl beneath the surface of his concentration. Who could possibly be below ground at the former chapel site? What purpose could an underground chamber serve in such a remote location? And most disturbing of all, could there be any connection to the disappearance of the 4 nuns 28 years ago? The last question seemed far-fetched, even to Father Elias. 28 years was an impossibly long time for anyone to remain concealed. Yet, the timing of his discovery on the very anniversary of the disappearance struck him as more than mere coincidence. Vehicle approaching from the direction of town interrupted his thoughts. It was a battered pickup truck that Father Elias recognized as belonging to Harold Gibbons. The former caretaker pulled up behind his sedan and emerged from the cab, his weathered face etched with concern. "Father Elias," Harold called as he approached. "Any sign of the police yet?" "Not yet," Father Elias replied, stepping out to greet him. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Harold nodded, his eyes scanning the road and the gated entrance to Redwood's property. "Been thinking about what you told me. It makes no sense. If Redwood built something underground where the chapel stood, people would have noticed the construction. You can't exactly dig a basement without heavy equipment. Unless it was done gradually over time," Father Elias suggested. "Or perhaps there was already some natural cavity in the ground that he expanded." Harold shook his head doubtfully. "This area doesn't have caves or anything like that. It's mostly solid bedrock beneath a few feet of soil." Before they could speculate further, the distinctive sound of approaching sirens reached them. A police cruiser rounded the bend, lights flashing but siren fading as it pulled up in front of Father Elias's car. 2 officers emerged, one older with graying hair at his temples, the other younger and lean with an alertness in his movements that suggested a military background. Their badges identified them as officers from the Shasta County Sheriff's Department. "Father Maro?" the older officer asked, approaching with a professional but not unfriendly demeanor. "Yes, officer. Thank you for coming." Father Elias gestured to his companion. "This is Harold Gibbons, the former caretaker of St. Denis Chapel that once stood on this property." The older officer nodded in acknowledgement. "I'm Deputy Williams and this is Deputy Reynolds. Dispatch says you reported hearing sounds coming from an underground location on private property. Can you walk us through exactly what you discovered?" Father Elias explained the circumstances that had brought him to the area, his accidental breaching of the fence, and the discovery of the air vent with sounds emanating from below. He was careful to emphasize his contrition for the trespassing, which Deputy Williams acknowledged with a small wave of his hand. "Let's focus on the potential welfare issue first," the deputy said. "If someone is indeed trapped or being held against their will, that takes precedence over a minor trespassing incident," Harold interjected. "I maintained St. Denis for over 20 years before it was sold. There was never any underground structure associated with the chapel. Whatever's there now was built after Silas Redwood took ownership." The younger officer, Deputy Reynolds, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up. "Mr. Redwood is a prominent landowner in these parts. These are serious implications." "I understand that," Father Elias said solemnly. "I'm not accusing Mr. Redwood of anything. I'm simply reporting what I heard and expressing concern for whoever might be down there." Deputy Williams nodded thoughtfully. "Fair enough. Let's take a look at this air vent you discovered. Mr. Gibbons, since you're familiar with the property, would you mind accompanying us?" "Not at all," Harold agreed. The 4 men walked toward the damaged section of fence. Father Elias pointed out the gap he had inadvertently created, and they carefully made their way through onto Redwood's property. Father Elias led them to the ornamental shrubbery that partially concealed the air vent. "Here it is," he said, parting the branches to reveal the rusted grate. Deputy Williams crouched beside it, examining the vent with a practiced eye. "This is old craftsmanship. Doesn't match the modern landscaping at all." Deputy Reynolds joined him, shining a flashlight through the grate. "Can't see much. The shaft angles off after about 6 feet. Listen," Father Elias urged. "Just be quiet for a moment." The 4 men fell silent, straining to hear any sound from below. For nearly a minute, there was nothing but the ambient noise of the forest, birds calling, leaves rustling. Father Elias began to worry that whoever had been below had either moved away from the vent or had fallen silent upon hearing voices above. Then, faintly but distinctly, a woman's voice began to hum. The melody was haunting, archaic, a fragment of sacred music that Father Elias instantly recognized, despite its broken, wavering quality. "Salve Regina," Deputy Williams whispered, a flicker of recognition crossing his weathered features. Harold nodded in confirmation. Yes, the Marian antiphon, sung in monasteries and convents for centuries. The humming continued for several more seconds, then faded, replaced by the sound of labored breathing and a dry, rasping cough. The officers exchanged significant glances. Deputy Reynolds straightened up, his expression now grave. "That's definitely someone down there, and from the sound of that cough they may need medical attention." "We need to speak with Mr. Redwood immediately," Deputy Williams decided. "This is now a welfare check at minimum." "I don't understand," Harold said, shaking his head in bewilderment. "This air vent wasn't here when the chapel stood, and there was never any basement or underground room. How could anyone be down there?" "That's what we aim to find out," Deputy Williams replied, his tone suggesting he had shifted fully into investigative mode. "Let's head to Redwood's residence." The four men made their way back to the road in their respective vehicles. Following the deputy's cruiser, Father Elias and Harold drove the short distance to Silas Redwood's main house. The imposing structure seemed more forbidding than ever as they approached, its many windows like watchful eyes surveying their arrival. Deputy Williams instructed Father Elias and Harold to remain by their vehicles, while he and Deputy Reynolds approached the front door. Father Elias watched as the officers knocked and waited, tension evident in their postures despite their professional demeanor. Several moments passed before the door opened. But it wasn't Silas Redwood who emerged. Instead, the group saw him approaching from the rear of the property, still dressed in his exercise clothes and leading a large German shepherd on a leash. His expression shifted rapidly from polite inquiry to barely contained fury when he spotted Father Elias and Harold standing near the officer's cruiser. "What is the meaning of this?" Redwood demanded as he reached the front steps. "Why are these trespassers on my property again?" Deputy Williams introduced himself and his partner, explaining the purpose of their visit in measured tones. "We received a report of sounds coming from what appears to be an underground structure at the former chapel site. We'd like to ask you a few questions about that, sir." Redwood's face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. First, this priest shows up uninvited, trespasses through my fence and onto my land, and now he's making wild accusations and wasting police resources." "No one is making accusations, Mr. Redwood," Deputy Reynolds said calmly. "We're simply following up on a welfare concern. Someone appears to be in an underground space on your property, and they sound like they may need medical attention." "That's absurd," Redwood snapped. "There's no one on my property except me and my dogs. I would know if someone were living in a— What? A secret underground bunker? Do you realize how ridiculous that sounds?" "Nevertheless, sir, we're obligated to investigate," Deputy Williams said firmly. "We'd like permission to check your home and the grounds, including any basement areas." "Absolutely not." Redwood's hand tightened on the dog's leash, causing the animal to shift restlessly. "This is private property. You have no right to search without a warrant." "Mr. Redwood," Deputy Reynolds began, his tone reasonable but insistent, "if there's someone in distress on your property, even a trespasser you're unaware of, wouldn't you want to know about it? This could be a squatter who's found their way into some old structure you don't even know exists." Redwood's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "There are no old structures I don't know about. I've owned this land for over 25 years. I know every inch of it." "Then what about the air vent near the former chapel site?" Deputy Williams asked. "The one that appears to ventilate an underground space." For a fraction of a second, something flickered in Redwood's expression. A momentary faltering that Father Elias caught before the man's face hardened once more into obstinate refusal. "I installed a drainage system when I landscaped that area," Redwood said dismissively. What you're calling an air vent is probably just a decorative grate covering a drain pipe. There's nothing sinister about it. A drainage system doesn't sing hymns or cough, Mr. Redwood, Deputy Williams observed dryly. Redwood turned his glare toward Father Elias. This man has clearly orchestrated this entire situation. He probably brought some device that plays recorded sounds and planted it near the drain. He's harassing me because he resents that I bought church property. I would never do such a thing, Father Elias protested, crossing himself. As God is my witness, I heard a woman's voice coming from that vent. We all heard it just now, Redwood scoffed. A priest invoking God while trespassing and lying. How very typical. That's enough, Mr. Redwood, Deputy Williams said sharply. We're asking for your voluntary cooperation. If you refuse, we'll have no choice but to pursue other legal avenues. Then pursue them, Redwood replied coldly. In the meantime, I want these people off my property immediately. If they're not gone in 2 minutes, I'll file trespassing charges against all of you. Recognizing the impasse, Deputy Williams nodded to Father Elias and Harold, indicating they should return to their vehicles. The officers followed, walking back to their cruiser with measured steps that suggested this retreat was strategic rather than final. As they reached the police car, Deputy Williams spoke quietly to Father Elias. Don't worry, Father. This isn't over. I'm going to contact dispatch and request information on the property deed, ownership history, and any prior complaints or incidents at this location. I also want to review the file on those missing nuns from 1980. Something's not right. Here, Father Elias nodded gratefully. Thank you, Deputy. I know how strange this must seem, but I truly believe someone needs help down there. I believe you. We all heard something, the deputy replied. Whether it's exactly what you think, we'll determine that with a proper investigation. Head back to Harold's place for now, we'll be in touch. The drive to Harold's home was brief but tense, with both men lost in their thoughts about the mysterious voice beneath the former chapel grounds. Harold's house proved to be a modest cabin set back from the main road, surrounded by towering pines that cast long shadows in the late afternoon sun. Not much, but it's home, Harold said as he led Father Elias inside. The interior was simply furnished but comfortable, with well-worn furniture and walls decorated with fishing memorabilia, and a few framed photographs. It's very welcoming, Father Elias replied sincerely, noting the cross hanging prominently above the stone fireplace. Harold busied himself in the small kitchen preparing tea, while Father Elias settled into an armchair. I kept several items. From St. Denis when it was decommissioned, Harold called over his shoulder. They're in a trunk in the spare room. I'll show you after we've had our tea. Father Elias nodded, his mind still preoccupied with the air vent and the haunting voice that had emerged from it. Harold, why do you think the diocese never informed me about the chapel being sold? I was at St. Agnes all those years ago, and my sister was among the missing nuns. Surely someone should have consulted me. Harold returned with 2 steaming mugs, handing one to Father Elias before taking a seat opposite him. The decision came from the bishop's office in Sacramento. I don't think it was handled well, to be honest. After what happened with the nuns, attendance dropped significantly. Then there was that incident with the bell tower. What exactly happened? Father Elias asked, sipping the hot tea gratefully. Structural failure, Harold explained. The chapel was built in the 1920s, and maintenance had been minimal. One Sunday morning in 1981, the bell tower developed a large crack. The old bell must have weighed 300 pounds, came crashing down, nearly killed poor Thomas Frell, who was filling in as caretaker while I was laid up with a broken leg. Was anyone hurt? By the grace of God, no. But it was the final straw for the diocese. They declared the building unsafe and closed it immediately. By early 1982, they decided to decommission it entirely rather than pay for repairs. Father Elias frowned. And Silas Redwood purchased it soon after. That's right. Paid cash from what I heard more than the land was worth, which raised a few eyebrows. But the diocese needed funds for renovations at the cathedral, so they didn't ask questions. What did Redwood do with the property immediately after purchase? Harold's brow furrowed in recollection. Demolished the chapel right away. Had a crew out there within days. There were some protests from locals who thought the building could have been saved, but legally there was nothing they could do. After that, he started landscaping the grounds, but he never built anything substantial on the chapel site itself. Did you notice any unusual construction activity? Anything that might suggest he was building something underground? Nothing obvious, Harold replied, then paused. Although there was a period in 1983 when people reported hearing strange noises at night, machinery running, that sort of thing, and some folks complained about tremors. Father Elias leaned forward, his interest piqued. Tremors? Like earthquakes? That's what the authorities concluded, minor seismic activity. But it seemed odd that it was localized to that specific area. Some people wondered if Redwood was doing some kind of excavation work, but no one investigated further. Harold shrugged. A deputy came out, looked around, found nothing suspicious, and that was that. Redwood has always been well connected, donates to the right causes, knows the right people. The conversation drifted to other topics. The changes in Elden Hollow over the years, the declining congregation at St. Agnes, and theological discussions that reflected both men's deep faith. Time passed swiftly, and Father Elias was surprised when his phone rang, breaking the comfortable rhythm of their conversation. Father Maro speaking, he answered. Father, this is Deputy Williams. The officer's voice sounded energized, purposeful. I've made some progress. I spoke with Judge Martinez, who's sympathetic to our concerns. She's granted an emergency warrant for a welfare search based on the reasonable suspicion of unlawful confinement. Father Elias felt a surge of hope. That's excellent news, Deputy. We'll be heading back to Redwood's property within the hour. I wanted to let you know, though I must advise you to stay away for safety reasons. This is now an official police operation. I understand, Father Elias replied, though his desire to be present was powerful. But, Deputy, if you do find something or someone, you'll be the first civilian I call, Williams promised. This whole situation began because of your persistence, Father. I respect that. After Harold overheard the conversation, he insisted they should at least be able to observe from a distance, arguing that their spiritual presence might be important if something significant was discovered. With some reluctance, Deputy Williams agreed they could remain in their vehicle at a safe distance, but strictly as observers. An hour later, Father Elias and Harold parked along the public road near the entrance to Redwood's property. From their position, they could see multiple police vehicles arriving, including a forensic van and an ambulance staging nearby, a precaution that sent a chill down Father Elias's spine. Deputy Williams approached their car briefly. We're going in with the warrant. I've set up my body camera to stream to this channel. He showed them how to access the feed on Father Elias's phone. You can watch from here, but do not approach under any circumstances. Is that clear? Both men nodded in agreement, and Deputy Williams returned to his colleagues. They watched as the assembled officers approached Redwood's front door, warrant in hand. Through the phone screen, they observed as Redwood answered the door, his face contorting with rage at the sight of the officers and the document they presented. The audio was muffled but clear enough to hear him protesting vigorously, threatening lawsuits and calls to his attorney. Despite his objections, the officers executed their search warrant, methodically examining the main house while Redwood was kept under supervision in his living room. After approximately 45 minutes, Deputy Williams reported through the body camera that the house and conventional basement had yielded nothing suspicious. Moving on to the forest road and outbuildings now, Williams narrated for the benefit of those monitoring the feed. Mr. Redwood has confirmed there's a storage shed along the private road connecting his main house to the former chapel site. Father Elias and Harold watched intently as the officers, accompanied by a visibly furious Redwood, made their way along the forest road. The path was well maintained but narrow, winding between ancient trees that created a tunnel-like effect in the fading daylight. After about 15 minutes of walking, the camera showed a modest wooden structure, the storage shed Redwood had mentioned. It was larger than Father Elias had expected, perhaps 20 feet square, with weathered siding and a metal roof. This is just a tool shed, Redwood could be heard saying. Garden equipment, maintenance supplies, that sort of thing. Complete waste of your time. The officers methodically searched the building, which did indeed contain an assortment of tools, lawn equipment, and gardening supplies. The space was dusty and appeared seldom used, with cobwebs in the corners and a musty odor that one officer commented on. As the search was nearing completion, there was a sudden noise. One of the officers had dropped a heavy wrench, which landed on the wooden floor with an unexpectedly hollow sound. The camera panned down to show Deputy Reynolds kneeling, tapping experimentally on the floorboards. "This section sounds different," he observed, removing his flashlight to examine the area more closely. These boards looked newer than the others. Despite Redwood's renewed protests, the officers began to remove the suspicious floorboards. Beneath them, they discovered a stone staircase descending into darkness. "Mr. Redwood," Deputy Williams said, his voice carrying clearly through the body camera's microphone, "would you care to explain this?" Redwood's face had gone pale, his earlier bluster replaced by tense silence. Deputy Reynolds shone his flashlight down the staircase, revealing a narrow passage carved into the bedrock. The air was damp, carrying a faint musty smell that suggested long disuse. "We're going down," Williams announced, his tone now clipped and authoritative. "Mr. Redwood, you're coming with us." Redwood stammered, This is just an old root, cellar. I forgot it was even here. It's been sealed for years." "We'll see about that," Williams replied, signaling for 2 additional officers to join them. The group descended the staircase, their footsteps echoing in the confined space. Father Elias and Harold watched the feed, their breath catching as the camera revealed a heavy iron door at the bottom of the stairs, secured with a modern padlock. "Open it," Williams ordered Redwood. "I don't have the key," Redwood said, his voice trembling. "I told you I haven't been down here in years." Williams nodded to an officer carrying a bolt cutter. With a swift motion, the padlock was severed and the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit chamber. The camera panned across the room, showing rough stone walls and a low ceiling. The air was thick with dust, and the faint sound of humming could be heard again, now much clearer. At the far end of the chamber, seated on a simple wooden bench, was a frail, elderly woman dressed in tattered remnants of what appeared to be a nun's habit. Her face was gaunt, her eyes sunken, but she continued to hum softly, her voice weak but resolute. Beside her lay a small pile of worn prayer books and a rosary, its beads polished from years of use. "Ma'am," Deputy Williams said gently, approaching her. "Can you hear me? We're here to help." The woman stopped humming, her head turning slowly toward the officers. Her eyes widened in confusion, then filled with tears. "Are you angels?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "No, ma'am, we're police officers," Williams replied, his voice softening. "What's your name?" She hesitated, as if struggling to recall. "Beatrice," she said finally. "Sister Beatrice Namora." Father Elias gasped, clutching Harold's arm. "It's her," he whispered. "One of the missing nuns." Harold's eyes were wide with disbelief. How is this possible? After all these years? The camera feed showed the officers carefully approaching Sister Beatrice, who seemed disoriented but not resistant. Deputy Reynolds radioed for the paramedics waiting above, requesting immediate assistance. As the officers helped her to her feet, Williams turned to Redwood, whose face was now ashen. "Explain this, Mr. Redwood," Williams demanded. "How did this woman end up locked in an underground chamber on your property?" Redwood shook his head, his voice barely audible. "I didn't know she was here. I swear, it was supposed to be a storage space. I never—" "Save it for the station," Williams interrupted, signaling for Redwood to be handcuffed. "You're under arrest for suspicion of unlawful confinement, and we'll see what else the investigation uncovers." The paramedics arrived, carefully guiding Sister Beatrice up the staircase and into the waiting ambulance. Father Elias and Harold, unable to stay in their vehicle any longer, approached the scene, staying at the perimeter as instructed. Through the open ambulance doors, Father Elias caught a glimpse of Sister Beatrice, now wrapped in a blanket, her frail form trembling as a paramedic checked her vitals. "Deputy Williams," Father Elias called, his voice thick with emotion. Will she be all right?" Williams approached, his expression a mix of relief and grim determination. She's in rough shape, Father. Malnourished, dehydrated, and likely suffering from long-term confinement. But she's alive, and the paramedics think she'll stabilize with proper care. We're taking her to Reading Medical Center. And the others? Father Elias asked, his heart pounding. My sister, Sister Teresa, and the others, were they down there? William shook his head. She was alone, Father. We searched the entire chamber. No one else was there. But we'll question her once she's stable, and we'll tear this property apart if we have to. If there's more to find, we will. Father Elias nodded, tears streaming down his face. The discovery of Sister Beatrice was a miracle, but the absence of his sister and the other nuns left a hollow ache in his chest. Harold placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, his own eyes glistening. As the ambulance drove away, its lights cutting through the twilight, the forensic team began their work, combing the underground chamber and the surrounding grounds for evidence. Redwood was led away in handcuffs, his head bowed, his earlier defiance replaced by a stunned silence. Over the next few days, the investigation unfolded with stunning revelations. Sister Beatrice, now recovering in the hospital, began to share fragments of her story. Though her memories were clouded by trauma and the passage of time, she revealed that the 4 nuns had been abducted during their retreat at St. Denis Chapel in 1980, lured into a trap by a man who had posed as a contractor assessing the chapel's condition. That man, she confirmed, was Silas Redwood. According to Beatrice, Redwood had been obsessed with the nuns' faith, believing their prayers held a mystical power he could harness for his own purposes. He had constructed the underground chamber in secret, using the cover of the chapel's demolition to conceal his activities. The nuns were kept captive, forced to pray, and sing hymns in a twisted ritual Redwood believed would grant him spiritual favor or protection. Over time, Sisters Mildred and Joan, the eldest, succumbed to the harsh conditions, their bodies disposed of in a manner Beatrice could not recall. Sister Teresa, Father Elias's sister, had died only a few years earlier, her health failing after decades of captivity. Beatrice had survived, clinging to her faith and her memories of the outside world, humming the sacred hymns that had sustained her through the darkness. She had lost track of time, unsure how many years had passed, but she never abandoned hope that God would send someone to find her. Silas Redwood, under intense questioning, eventually confessed to the abductions and the deaths of the 3 nuns, though he claimed the deaths were unintentional, a result of his inability to provide adequate care. His motives remained murky, a blend of delusion, obsession, and a warped sense of spirituality. The authorities uncovered additional evidence on the property, including personal effects belonging to the nuns, hidden in a locked safe in Redwood's home. Among them was a small silver cross that Father Elias recognized as Teresa's, a gift he had given her on the day she took her vows. The community of Elden Hollow was shaken by the revelations, grappling with the horror of what had transpired in their midst. St. Agnes of Mercy held a series of memorial services for Sisters Mildred, Joan, and Teresa, their names finally cleared of the rumors that had tainted their memory. Father Elias delivered the eulogies, his voice steady despite the grief that weighed on him. He spoke of their faith, their sacrifice, and the enduring power of hope, embodied by Sister Beatrice's survival. Sister Beatrice, though physically frail, began to recover, supported by the care of the hospital staff and the prayers of the community. Father Elias visited her daily, bringing her prayer books and sitting by her side as she recounted stories of her time with Teresa. Through these conversations, Father Elias found a measure of peace, knowing his sister had remained steadfast in her faith until the end. Silas Redwood was charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, unlawful confinement, and manslaughter. His trial drew national attention, a grim reminder of the darkness that could lurk beneath a veneer of respectability. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, his wealth and connections unable to shield him from justice. In the months that followed, Father Elias worked with the diocese to establish a memorial at the former site of St. Denis Chapel. The land, reclaimed by the church after Redwood's conviction, was consecrated anew, and a simple stone monument was erected, bearing the names of the 4 nuns and a verse from Psalm 23. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. On the first anniversary of Sister Beatrice's rescue, Father Elias stood before the memorial, leading a small congregation in prayer. Sister Beatrice, now living in a nearby convent, joined him, her voice stronger as she sang the Salve Regina, the hymn that had carried her through the darkness. The melody rose into the forest air, a testament to survival, faith, and the enduring light of truth. Father Elias looked out at the gathered faces, his heart full, despite the scars of loss. May the souls of Mildred, Joan, and Teresa, through the mercy of God, rest in peace, he intoned, making the sign of the cross. Amen. The congregation responded, their voices echoing through the trees, a chorus of remembrance and hope.